I died in the first frost of autumn. I remember the exact moment my wolf went quiet inside me. Not with fear, but with a kind of deep, deliberate calm, the way a hearth fire settles into its final warmth before the last log burns through. I had known for nearly a season. A wound that would not close, a chill that crept inward no matter how many healers my stewards summoned. I told no one. I told her least of all. Her name was Saren. She was my mate and my Luna, and the whole reason I had ever learned to be soft inside a hard life. I had been Alpha King of Thornmere for 11 years, when the moon chose her for me. A quiet woman from the border villages. A weaver's daughter. The kind of woman the court overlooked until she laughed, and the whole hall turned toward the sound. She was not a warrior. She was not a diplomat. She was simply the truest person I had ever stood beside, and I loved her in the way that some men love the ground beneath their feet, without ceremony, without condition, the way you love something you cannot imagine existing without. So when the healers told me I had perhaps one season left, I did not rage. I sat in my study for a single night, alone with my wolf and the fire, and I made a plan, not for the kingdom. My generals and my council would manage the kingdom. I made a plan for her. I knew how Saren grieved. I had seen it when her father died. The way she went quiet and turned inward, the way the world's edges seemed to blur for her, as though she could not quite believe it had continued moving. She would need anchors. She would need small moments of being found and remembered, strung close enough together that she never fell too long into the dark. So I wrote 11 letters. One for each year I had been her mate. For each month I expected her to need most. The naming day, the first frost, the feast of the long night, the spring thaw. I had them placed, carefully and quietly, by a man I trusted completely. My steward Aldrich, who had known me since boyhood and wept when I gave him the task, and then straightened his spine and said he would not fail me. Each letter told her something true, something I had, perhaps, not said clearly enough while I had the mornings to say it. The color of the light on her hair the first time I saw her, at the market in the lower village. The sound of her voice reading aloud, which I used to pretend to sleep through, just so she would keep going. The way she smelled of pine and wool in winter and warm earth in summer. The exact words I had spoken to the moon the night of our bonding, which I had never told another living soul. And the last letter, the 11th, I sealed with my mark and told Aldrich to wait until she was ready. He would know when. I did not tell Saren any of it. I spent my last weeks with her the way I spent every week, walking the hold's high walls at dusk, sharing the long table with our wolves at our feet, watching her work at the loom in the east room, where the light came in sideways in the afternoon. Told her I loved her every morning. I made sure she knew. When I died, I was holding her hand. What I did not expect, what I could not have planned for, was the moon's answer. I did not know until it happened that a bond as old and as deep as ours could ask something of the moon itself. I did not know that the moon sometimes listens, but I found myself, not gone, not scattered, but elsewhere and new like a fire carried from one hearth to another in the cup of two careful hands. The flame itself unchanged. I was reborn, not in Thornmere, farther north, the hold of Keldmere, cold and quiet kingdom with gray stone walls and an honest pack. I grew up knowing nothing of my past, only that something in me had already loved deeply and had not finished. My wolf was older than my body. Dreams were full of loomlight and pine and a name I could not quite hold. Saren. I came south when I was grown, as Alpha King of Keldmere. My council thought it was diplomacy. I thought so too at first. I told myself I had come to negotiate a river trade and nothing more. My wolf knew. My wolf had always known. From the moment we crossed into Thornmere's border valleys, something in me pulled taut as a bowstring, aimed at a single point on the horizon. I found her in the lower village. She was at the market, the same stall where I had first seen her before I could remember seeing her. She was older. There were lines at the corners of her eyes now, and she held herself the way people hold themselves when they have carried a long grief without complaint. She was purchasing dried herbs from an old woman, and she was laughing at something the old woman had said, and the sound of that laugh cracked something open in my chest that I had been carrying sealed for 23 years. My wolf did not growl. My wolf simply went still, the way a man goes still when he has come home. I did not approach her, not yet. I was not certain of anything, not of what the moon had done, not of who I now was to her, not of whether what I felt was mine to claim or only mine to carry quietly. So I asked Aldrich for the letters. Old Aldrich, now gray-headed and slow, stared at me for a long time when I appeared at his door. He had kept a secret for 23 years. He studied my face the way a man studies a fire he recognizes from a different hearth, and then he sat down heavily in his chair and pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes and said, very softly, "I knew you would come back." He gave me the remaining letters, the ones she had not yet received. I left them for her, one at a time the way I had always planned. I left the naming day letter at her gate on her naming morning. I left the spring thaw letter tucked beneath the stone wolf on her threshold, exactly where the old steward's note said I had always left small things to make her smile. I waited and watched from a careful distance, and slowly, the way a season turns, not in a single morning, but in the steady accumulation of small warmings, I watched her begin to lift her head. Again, the 8th letter I brought to her myself. I told her only that Aldrich had asked me to deliver it. She looked at the seal, the old mark of Thornmere's Alpha, my mark, and her hands went still. She did not open it in front of me, but she looked up at me before I turned to go, and something in her face shifted, uncertain and searching. The way a person looks when a word they have been trying to remember for years suddenly surfaces. "You have kind eyes," she said quietly. "Don't know why, but I feel as though I have been waiting for you." I had to breathe through what that did to me. I said only, "I have been waiting longer." I left the last letter 3 weeks after that, the 11th, sealed with my mark. I left it on the table in her east room in the early morning, and I waited in the courtyard outside, and I heard, through the stone walls, the long silence that meant she was reading it. She came out with the letter in her hand and tears on her face. She stood in the pale morning and looked at me, this man who was and was not the man she had lost, and the mate mark on her wrist blazed gold, sudden and warm as a hearth fire catching. My own mark answered it. My wolf, silent for 23 years of a new life, finally, completely exhaled. "It's you," she said. "It's always been me." She crossed the courtyard slowly. I did not move. She had to choose this. It had to be hers to come to, freely, the way it had been hers the first. She times when she was close enough that I could see the exact way the morning light caught in her hair, which I had written down in the first letter 23 years ago, and which was still the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, the letter against my chest over my heart. "You planned this," she said, "even then, all of it." "I didn't know about the coming back," I said honestly. "That part was the moon's idea. I only knew that you would need to be found." She looked at me for a long time. The wolf at my feet sat down and leaned its great head against her leg, which it had not done for anyone in 23 years. "Then you had better come inside," she said, and her voice was steady and warm and entirely sure. "I have been keeping the hearth lit." I claimed her that morning before the village, quietly and without ceremony. Just the mate mark blazing between our joined hands in the old pack, Thornmere bearing silent, glad witness. There were no scorners to humble. There was only the woman I had loved for 2 lifetimes, choosing me again with her whole heart. And the moon, somewhere above the pale morning clouds, keeping its word. I had been her mate before. Now I would be her mate for everything that came after. The hearth was lit. I was finally home.